Beautiful, beautiful. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. I'm really smiling from ear to ear and excited to be sitting down with my dear friend Portia Buckley to talk about her beautiful short film, CLODAGH. Welcome, Portia. Nice to see you, my friend.
Oh, Kevin, so lovely to see you, and thank you for having me and doing this with me. It's very exciting.
Before we get into talking about the film, I do think I want to talk a little bit about how we met and just how proud I am of your journey. Um, Meeting at NYU Film School back in 2015, taking directing classes together. I've always been an admirer of your work, just from the directing exercises you did in class to the short film that you made. We were in the program, to the collaborators you surrounded yourself with. Your voice is distinct and I'm just a really big fan. And so when I saw this short film, it really resonated with me. And when I saw that you directed it, it made a lot of sense.
Oh,
So, I'm just like over the moon to be in this position to talk about this and to talk about the journey to how you got it made.
well, thank you, Kevin, and ditto. I mean, it was such a special experience going to Tisch, doing the writing, directing MFA, and being in a class together, and you know, actually kind of bearing our soul in those classes in a way, but showing very raw directing exercises. It was a bonding experience, and it was really fun to see, fellow classmates and peers kind of grow and evolve in that kind of pretty safe space, I'd say.
There are many classmates that we work with on this film, and we'll get into them later when we start talking about your crew. But among them, Jomo Frey is a very accomplished cinematographer who you've been working with since the film school days. Obviously, other crew members, Harry, the editor, 2K, Thomas, and it just feels like a labor of community, a labor of love. And I'm just curious, like, before we get into the film, why did you think it was important to work in that way on this project? Was it out of necessity, or, did you do it this way because it's just how you enjoy working?
Well, I think, we also were very lucky with this film with the kind of collaborators that came on board. And, as you say, I worked with Jomo back in 2017, and we first, when we were both students, collaborated on another film that was set actually in rural Ireland called Radiator, and just had an amazing experience working together. Um, and then moving forward, had always wanted to work with him again, and felt very lucky that he was available and willing. And like anything, it normally starts with a
Right.
script, but we have a great relationship. He's a true artist, and he brought so much of himself to the film. And I think that when one is making short films, one's so limited with budgets that in a way supporting yourself with a community of people that care about you as a filmmaker, care about the film, the love of making film, makes it a much nicer process because you're all there for the same cause. And it definitely is a favors based thing. And I definitely, and we definitely as a film, owe a lot of favors back in return. Hopefully, we will return at some stage. But that was what was amazing. And we definitely had that at Tish, which was going, for example, 2K, who adorably came and was lighting technician on this film. I went and was AC for him in Uganda when he was directing his film there. So,
Mm,
it's a wonderful thing to be able to kind of share skills in
absolutely.
a kind of creative community.
Absolutely. So let's get into this film. It was written, Clone is written by Michael Lindley and Portia Buckley and directed by Portia Buckley, of course. I want you to talk about your partnership with your writer and the genesis of this film. When did you all come together and decide this is a story that we want to tell, this is the way that we want to tell it, and we want to do it right now?
Well, it was interesting. Like all stories, it goes kind of quite way back. So Mike Linley, my writing partner, is also my husband, father of my son, and my producer. And we were making a documentary about 10 years ago, a short doc, and we were following his uncle, who's a priest in Warrington. And
Mm.
during this, whilst we were following this priest, we came across this priest's housekeeper that worked for him. and we were kind of fascinated by her because, she gave so much in service to her church, her priest, her community, and asked for so little in return. And we felt that that was, quite a rare kind of character in this day and age. Anyway, so we were very interested in it. A few
Mm.
years went by, and then a couple of years ago, we looked, we'd made 3 films in Ireland. I'm half Irish. And we looked on RTE and we found this clip of this housekeeper. And it was really amazing because this housekeeper was being kind of probed by this journalist, and she was very, very serious, devout, and wouldn't spill the beans on the priest at all. But
Right.
she was wearing this kind of Diamante jumper. And with this
Mm.
Diamante jumper, we felt like she had got ready for that interview in preparation, knowing she was going to be on the television. And there was this kind of artistic heartbeat under it, kind of being hidden under this, and it showed that.
Mm.
And so with the element of the Irish dancing, we wanted to kind of expose that and kind of bring out that passion from this very devout, serious woman who really never took anything for herself. And then which in connection to my partner, what was quite interesting, it was only in hindsight after we made the film that we really realized that we had made a film about a child coming into someone's life, someone that was specifically focused on their work and turning their
Mm.
life upside down, and the joy and complexity that that brought. And we had actually written the film when our son was 6 months old. And,
Oh, well.
previously we hadn't had a child. And we were experiencing the same thing, of that joy and light that a child does bring into your life, but also the kind of complexity of juggling life around it.
Mm. I think that's really interesting when you talk about becoming a parent and that sort of shifting your approach to how you tell stories in general. Like, I was thinking about this film and just the point of view and the perspective. Like, it could have told it from CLODAGH's point of view, but we chose Mrs. Kelly's how we enter the story. And obviously, you ground us in both of their emotional journeys, but like, we're with Mrs. Kelly. I'm curious why you chose her point of view for this story and like how your being a parent informs some of the decisions and the way that she's moving throughout the story.
Well, I think we were very interested in the character of Mrs. Kelly, although obviously Clodagh is the kind of, the titular character. Really the film's called Clodagh, but it's really about the Clodagh effect and the effect she has on
Yeah.
everyone that she touches, really, who
Mm.
witness her kind of majesty and dance and and yeah, and I think that what was really interesting for us with Mrs. Kelly was the idea that there's a character that has never changed and
Mhm.
will never change and has their structure, has their routine, has their belief system, their set of morals, and a strict kind of moral code of conduct. And they witness something. And in the case of the film Clodagh, they witness Clodagh's dance, which is a sort of form of artistic expression, and witnessing some art changes them. And we love the
Mm.
idea of having a character that wouldn't change for anything, but she gets struck with artistic experience, and that
Mhm.
changes her.
It almost like it feels like it kind of frees them in a way, not and not even just Mrs. Kelly, but like Mr. Hickey as well, where it's like, oh, we need her, she needs us, we need her. It's almost like, especially when they're in the scene where Mr. Hickey speeds up the tempo and Clodagh's dancing. He really feels like he comes alive in that moment. So, I mean, can you just talk about that and just like the freedom that they seem to feel whenever she kind of comes into their lives, and then they have to make the decision with whether to allow her in or not.
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting because Clodagh dances in the Shanos style, which is literally translates as old style, which is her arms are moving and her face is smiling. Whereas the other girls in Mrs. Kelly's class dance in the very kind of what we know now is the traditional Irish dancing of arms straight down the side and the po face, straight faces. And it's been said when the Catholic Church adopted Irish dancing, that's when the arms were pinned down the side because they thought, if your arm brushed up against someone, it would invoke impure thought, and a smile might invite something illicit. Anyway, so so with Clodagh's Sean-nós, there is a joyfulness and almost a pagan kind of spiritual effect it has. And you're so right in saying that Mr. Hickey has this whole new lease of life. He says to her in the Irish, I haven't played that since I was a very young man, and then he says, what a wonder you are. And it ignites him. And he is obviously, almost Mrs. Kelly's conscience, because she's in various stages of denial. And he's there
Mm,
saying what we know she's going through, because we've seen her struggling with this. But
mhm.
he's just sort of admitting it. Um, but yeah, I think that the other thing is that, the dance happens quite early on in the film. And
Sure.
it's such an important part of the film because it has to carry us, Mrs. Kelly, Mr. Hickey, but also us as the audience through to the end of the film, and it needs to impact us.
Mm,
Um, and and I think it does stay with us. I think there is something haunting about that
yeah.
dance. Um,
Yeah.
and and um, and it's kind of exuberance, and I guess it's just freedom.
Yeah, but you did something really beautiful in that moment. Like for me, the reason why it carries is because like there's that moment where CLODAGH starts dancing, and then we really see Mrs. Kelly and like how it lands on her, what it makes her feel. We see it changing her in the moment, and now I'm like, wow, like what is inside of her? What just happened to Mrs. Kelly in that moment? And that kind of brings me to my next question, which is really about the pacing of the film, which I thought is a really huge strength of this story. You give us a lot of moments of stillness and reflection, quiet moments, private moments, but then they're balanced with these like really big moments of like high energy. Is that something that you developed when you were writing the script? Did you know going in like this is how I want it to be paced? This is how the story has to flow for it to work? Or is that something that you found on set or in the edit?
Well, it was something that I think, in a way, was there in the script, because, in a way, it's a simple story. Um,
Mm,
I wanted it to be very visual. The first, 3 minutes of the film are almost a silent film of Mrs. Kelly at work, in service.
yeah.
And in a way, it was important for me, and for us all that were working on the film, for Mrs. Kelly to be shown kind of isolated within these institutions, so within the church, or, the father, the priest, is sort of always off camera, and he's always leaving and she's left behind and she's cleaning, because, and it's obviously a much darker palette.
Mm,
Because then when this injection and this energy comes in with Clodagh and her dance, prior to that, the whole thing's been shot on sticks. Um,
mm,
no pans, literally static shots, and Mrs. Kelly
mhm,
moves within the frame. Um, and then, with Clodagh's dance, we have the injection of the dolly and the track and this sort of movement and this very light, airy space,
mhm,
that's, very bright, that
mhm,
kind of differentiates between Mrs. Kelly's life. Then there's life before Clodagh, and then life after Clodagh, and life after Clodagh goes back to these kind of slightly more static shots until
mhm,
she engages and she makes a decision, and we go to handheld. So there's sort of this, I think that really helps with the pacing, because you're staying in these moments for, I think, long enough to connect with this woman's job and every day, and what she
mhm,
does as a service. And
mhm,
yeah, and then talking of kind of the light and the dark, we were very, I had seen some Vermeer paintings, and I really wanted to light it and shoot it like that. And when I spoke to Jomo, he loved that. And I think he did a super job actually making that a reality. Um,
mhm,
but, we were very interested in those images because Vermeer depicted these women in service. He didn't depict them as mothers. There were no hearth, no cradles, how we were used to really see women depicted, but their service was the thing that was kind of presented center frame as the virtue. And we like this idea that, Mrs. Kelly, the work was what was kind of center frame, and because
sure.
was what is center frame within Mrs. Kelly's life herself. She is in
Hmm.
service.
Hmm. I think you do such a beautiful job of, without words, and without much time, like really showing this monotonous, rigid life, that she's living, I'm curious if you can talk about that and how she breaks free of that, and then kind of talk about, because what I got out of it for me was the church's role in community, and how there are these established rules within these, religious institutions, and how it could kind of push members of congregations and members of the church toward a really rigid life. You know what I mean? Um, but then something happens and they're broken free of that, you know? So can you just talk about that? Just the church's role in community and what inspired you to kind of dive into that? Is it personal for you, or is it just something that you are just interested in, out of observation?
Yeah, well, I think it's a combination. I was raised as a Catholic, and then, as I said, with Mike's uncle, who's a Catholic priest, spending time with him. I mean, my Irish grandparents deeply religious. My mum's Italian, so Roman Catholic on the other side, deeply religious. So I've been brought up with it. But it's very interesting, kind of the role of the church also in a rural community, is that it's very much a communal space where people come together and socialize. But it, does hold a lot of power over communities. And I think part of the conundrum that Mrs. Kelly comes up against, which is essentially kind of semantics of where this which parish this young girl comes from, what her kind of air code is, or one would call it, geographical location, postal address, um, does kind of comment on the kind of bureaucracy and rules that are kind of created with institutions, and the fact that the participants, like a lot of the time, blindly follow them without questioning um, what the right thing is to do. And I think that's what's special in CLODAGH, the film CLODAGH, is that Mrs. Kelly comes to what we all come to. We come to crossroads all the time in our lives, which is like, do you follow your head or your heart? And us as the audience is willing her to follow her heart. But, that is in direct conflict with the world that she knows, which is a rule abiding world. Um, yeah.
Can you talk about the cast? I'm like very interested. It's such a strong cast. Mrs. Kelly, Clodagh, Mr. Hickey, everyone just really brought it. How did you find this cast? How did you bring everybody together? Just talk about the whole process.
So, there's a few elements. So Breedney Noctin, who plays Mrs. Kelly, we always knew we wanted to work with her. She's a big actor in Ireland, big theatre actor. We'd seen her in Banshees of Inisherin. She was great in her role in that. Um, and and she has an amazing energy, and she brought so much of herself and her own kind of context of her own history being brought up in Ireland to Mrs. Kelly. Like, she knew those characters. And we were so lucky to have that kind of knowledge and history brought into that character by her. So we always knew we wanted to work with her. Anyway, but Caitlin Rose Downey, our dancing star,
Yes.
Mike and I wrote the line, Clodagh dances as if touched by God. And then we wrote the script, we were like, okay, great, we're happy with the script. And then we thought, oh my goodness, we've got to find someone that can dance as if they're touched by God, but is also an actor who can act, who also
Hmm.
happens to be 14. So it was quite serendipitous. We got put in touch with the Watson Twin Academy in Dublin, and we went just to find the backing dancers. And they all danced, and honestly, they're all so talented. They completely downplay their abilities in our film. They're all stars.
Yeah, yeah.
There was this girl waiting off to the left quietly, and she came up and she danced for us. We didn't realize at the time. I mean, she totally blew us away, but that she was a two-time world champion.
Oh
And
my goodness.
and then she said to us, "Oh, do you want, I'm ready to read for the part of Clodagh. And we thought, well, she probably doesn't know her lines. And, we didn't want to ruin the moment. It was so spectacular. And we said, well, do you want us to come back? And she said, no, no, I'm ready. And
Wow.
she, I set up my iPhone and she just read for it, knew all her lines.
Wow.
Honestly, she didn't really need any notes, but I gave her two or three notes that she kind of managed to nail all three.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I wouldn't have been able to do that anyway. And so
So
we were
strong.
really, blessed by her. And then Jim Kitson was lovely and, super because he's actor and a fiddle player. And then the wonderful Aidan O'Hare, who plays Clodagh's father, we've worked with before on another film, and loved working with him. So it was very charming of him to come and do a day with us.
That's beautiful. I mean, the chemistry was, really strong. Did you all like rehearse together, or how did you build the chemistry, or just everyone show up on the day and it was just
Well,
what it was?
well, we only had 5 days to shoot. So what we did is, I spoke to the actors prior to shooting, but really they all met on set. We didn't have time to shoot beforehand just because our schedules wouldn't allow that. Um,
Sure.
but we would really, do the classic, which was, block it. Then whilst, lighting was happening, we would just rehearse and rehearse. But I
Oh,
have to
wow.
say, I was really impressed with Caitlin's ability, considering that, Breed is such a seasoned professional playing Mrs. Kelly, that in that, for example, that office scene when they're up against each other, that
Yeah.
she really holds her own. And there is that lovely chemistry, as you say, between them. And I think, that's a mixture of, their focus and intent and a bit of luck, like anything, you know.
hmm hmm So I would love to hear more about just your connection to Ireland. How many films have you shot in Ireland? I know you said you shot one in 2017. That was your second year film that you shot there, right?
Yeah, so this was the third piece we shot in Ireland. So I produced a film that we wrote called God's Own Children in about
Mm.
2015. Then
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, no, no. Then we did Radiator that Mike produced, and shot with Jomo. And then Clodagh. And really my connection to Ireland is that my dad's Irish, my grandparents obviously on his side are Irish, and my parents have lived there for the last 20 years. But I was brought up in London, and we would go
Mm,
every summer, Christmas, Easter to Ireland and spend time in this rural community. And it was such a
mm,
kind of shift from what I was used to in the city in London.
mm,
And we would spend so much time with family and family friends over there. And it created like a deep rooted nostalgia in me, and a big kind of part of my formative years of growing up. And then, of
mm.
course, when my parents moved there, I returned there all the time. Um, but I really love working there because I love so many elements of it, but there's so much talent there, um,
Yeah.
and the energy. People are really excited about making films there. um,
Mm,
it's not always like that when you film in a city. People want you to
yeah.
go away. But
Yeah.
when you go into rural countryside, you're suddenly embraced by people. I mean, for example, that harvest was being brought in, whilst we were shooting something, and it's a terrible noise. And Mike could call the farmer and say, "Do you mind holding on for 30 minutes?" And he was like, "Yeah, of course, no bother." And I'm
Oh, it's
just like,
beautiful.
just really, really a lot of support from the community, which you
I
need
love
with these
that.
small projects. You need people behind you.
Absolutely. I always say film is about community. From like the community that you foster on set, like when you're creating the work to the community that you're creating that work in, the physical community. And so that's really beautiful. And I have the same experience. Like when you go into like these rural southern communities in North Carolina and stuff like that, this is like, I don't know. There's a certain like special embrace that you feel, you know what I mean, when you're like in a place that you grew up or spent time in, and you're going back and telling those stories. But for you, it's even more special because you had family and friends creating with you on set as well, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Can you just talk about that and just like what that whole experience was like? You have a community of people that you grew up with, creating with you, and you're creating in a place that you've grown up in. How was
Yeah.
that for you?
Well, it's very nice. Another great thing about shooting in Ireland is that, people are keen to come to Ireland. That's you've got that on your side as well.
For sure. For
But it
sure.
was lovely, it was amazing having that kind of Tisch community, fellow students that we were now friends and working together there. But I mean, my brother Luke has been on every single film set we've ever been on. He was assistant grip on CLODAGH. He was assistant gaffer on Birthday Girl. My mum did the sort of production design because obviously we were only shot for 5 days. So previous to that, we were kind of getting everything ready. Then I had a
Oh,
friend
wow.
come on who was a production designer, Lyndon, a friend Maggie doing costume. So, it sort of did end up feeling like a really big, everyone would eat together at night, cast and crew, and it just felt like um in a way quite a kind of theatrical experience. I would, that you are kind of together, all the time. It's very intense, and everyone just embraced it. So I feel very lucky to have been supported by all those, friends, family, and colleagues. And I felt like that whilst we were shooting, and I feel like that when I watch the film. Like, I feel full of the experience, the positive
Yeah.
experience I had whilst we were making
Yeah.
it, which isn't always the way because sometimes you watch something, you're like, oh God, that was a that
Well, you know
was
what?
tough.
Like, I always say that like what you feel when you're creating, like when you're on set making things, like the spirit and the energy that you're creating with is what people are going to feel and take away when they're watching it. And so, I mean, when I'm watching it, I really do feel that love and that communal, approach that was taken through the film. Is like it kind of just permeates and like seeps through the screen in every frame. And so I
Oh,
just
well,
think that's really, yeah, yeah. Kudos to you.
that's so
Kudos to
lovely
you.
to hear and really beautifully said. If it does that, I'm thrilled. Um,
What's next for Claude? Will people see more of Claude? I know people are asking. It's such a beautiful, rich story with beautiful, rich characters. So what's next for you with this story?
yeah, so Mike and I have actually just finished writing a draft for a feature, and it's based in the same world, and it's got those three characters, but it's a very different story. It's evolved into something else. But we felt so drawn to those characters, and we felt they had so much more to give and say and communicate. Um, and so we're very excited about that as the next project.
That's beautiful, beautiful. Well, very, very happy that I had an opportunity to chat with you about this. I'm a big fan and champion of this film. I think it's one of the best short films made this year. And I'm really excited that the journey that you're on with it. So congratulations, Portia.
Oh, Kevin, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for championing the film. Really meaningful, and I'm really so glad you enjoyed it, and I hope other people do too.
Oh, they do. I know they do. I've been hearing them talk about it.
Oh,
All
so
right, y'all. Thank you so much for joining the conversation, y'all, and have a good one. Thanks,
thank
Portia.
you so much, Kevin. Bye. Thank you.